The date is March 31st, 1985, and Madison Square Garden is boiling with anticipation, for the eyes of the world are fixed on the unprecedented spectacle of the first ever WrestleMania. Cyndi Lauper, Mr. T, and Muhammad Ali are all in attendance, as the biggest names in entertainment and sports have gathered for what the WWF is billing as the greatest wrestling event of all time. Jimmy Superfly Snuka is focused with laser-like intensity. In mere moments, he will be ringside in Hulk Hogan's corner for a tag team match that will help define wrestling's new era. But for Snuka, this night represents more than just athletic glory. It's a chance at redemption, an opportunity to reclaim his spot atop the wrestling world after months shrouded in controversy. As Snuka emerges from behind the curtain and makes his way to the ring, the Garden erupts. 19,000 fans rise to their feet, their cheers drowning out even the booming entrance music. In this moment, it's easy to forget the dark cloud that's been hanging over Superfly's career. Just 2 years earlier, Snuka had been implicated in the death of his mistress, Nancy Argentino. The circumstances were suspicious, the evidence troubling, yet here he stands as a popular persona, bathed in adulation, ready to make his mark on wrestling's grandest stage. This was Jimmy Superfly Snuka at the crossroads of his career, still capable of electrifying an audience, still one of the most popular figures in professional wrestling. But beneath the surface, the cracks were beginning to show. The Nancy Argentino case would continue to haunt him, a specter that would never fully disappear, no matter how high he soared in the ring. To truly understand the complex legacy of Jimmy Snuka, we must journey back to where it all began, not in the squared circle, but on the shores of the Fiji Islands. James Wiley Smith was born on May 18, 1943 in Fiji's capital city, Suva. The genesis of Snuka was steeped in complexity. His biological father was married to another woman, while his mother, Louisa Smith, was engaged to another man, who she married before his birth. Snuka's formative years were characterized by a geographic odyssey, traversing the Pacific from the Marshall Islands to the Hawaiian archipelago, a trajectory that undoubtedly shaped his nascent worldview and cultural adaptability. In Hawaii, Jimmy discovered his passion for physical fitness. He threw himself into bodybuilding, quickly making a name for himself in local competitions. Mr. Hawaii, Mr. Waikiki, Mr. North Shore, the titles began to pile up, along with the muscle mass, but it was a chance encounter with professional wrestler Dean Ho that would change the course of Jimmy's life forever. Ho saw in the young bodybuilder the raw potential for greatness in the squared circle. Under Ho's tutelage, Jimmy began to learn the ropes, both literally and figuratively. Jimmy made his professional wrestling debut in 1970. From the very beginning, he stood out. In an era when most wrestlers kept their feet firmly planted on the mat, Snuka took to the air. His high-flying style, combined with his exotic background and chiseled physique, made him an instant sensation. Throughout the 1970s, Snuka honed his craft in territories across the United States. From Portland to the Mid-Atlantic, he captured championships and the hearts of fans everywhere he went. But it was his arrival in the World Wrestling Federation in 1982 that would catapult Jimmy Snuka to superstardom. When Snuka debuted, he was initially positioned as a villain, managed by the nefarious Captain Lou Albano. In a series of high-stakes encounters, Snuka's pursuit of the championship against Bob Backlund culminated in a steel cage spectacle at Madison Square Garden on June 28, 1982. The match's climax saw Snuka execute a daring leap from the cage's apex, only to meet the vacant canvas as Backlund's timely evasion secured his victory and title retention. This aerial ballet of near miss and narrow escape so captivated the wrestling world that Pro Wrestling Illustrated bestowed upon it the prestigious Match of the Year accolade. Even though Snuka was supposed to portray a heel, audiences couldn't help but be mesmerized by Snuka's incredible athleticism and undeniable charisma. Before long, Superfly had become one of the most popular figures in the company. Snuka's feuds with the likes of Bob Backlund and Magnificent Muraco became the stuff of legend. His leap from the top of the steel cage onto Muraco at Madison Square Garden in October 1983 is often cited as one of the most iconic moments in wrestling history. This was Snuka in his prime, a human highlight reel who seemed capable of defying gravity itself. Snuka's 1984 feud with Roddy Piper, ignited by the infamous coconut incident on Piper's Pit, exemplified the era's penchant for visceral, character-driven storytelling. This rivalry, which culminated in Snuka's storyline injury and subsequent rehabilitation, not only captivated audiences across the United States, but also served as a testament to the Federation's ability to weave real-life circumstances into compelling narrative arcs, ultimately shaping Snuka's trajectory and cementing his legacy within the sport's pantheon. But as Snuka's star rose in the wrestling world, his personal life was spiraling out of control. The demands of life on the road, combined with the physical toll of his high-risk style, led Snuka down a dark path of steroids, cocaine, and womanizing. And then came the night that would cast a long shadow over the rest of his life and career. On the night of May 10, 1983, Jimmy Snuka and his mistress, Nancy Argentino, checked into room 427 of the George Washington Motor Lodge in Whitehall Township, Pennsylvania. Snuka was in town for a WWF television taping. What transpired in that room over the next few hours remains a subject of controversy and speculation to this day. According to Snuka's initial statement to police, he returned to the motel room to find Nancy gasping for air. He called the front desk for help, and Nancy was rushed to a nearby hospital, where she tragically died the next day. But according to the coroner's report, Argentino died of traumatic brain injuries consistent with a moving head striking a stationary object. Autopsy findings also revealed that Argentino had more than 24 cuts and bruises on her head, ear, chin, arms, hands, back, buttocks, legs, and feet, a glaring red flag of serious domestic abuse. Forensic pathologist Isidore Mihalakis, who performed the autopsy, wrote at the time that the case should be investigated as a homicide until proven otherwise. Deputy Lehigh County Coroner Wayne Snyder later said, "Upon viewing the body and speaking to the pathologist, I immediately suspected foul play and so notified the district attorney." In a prelude to this tragedy, Snuka's violent tendencies had manifested 4 months earlier in a January 1983 incident at a New York hotel, where he assaulted Argentino and subsequently resisted arrest, engaging in a physical altercation with multiple law enforcement officers summoned by the establishment's night manager. The investigation's complexities deepened with the revelation that Vince McMahon allegedly attempted to dissuade Argentino from pressing charges against Snuka after the January incident, despite her initial pursuit of legal action, a detail that emerged from an officer's note in the subsequently released murder investigation file. Despite being the sole suspect in Argentino's death, Snuka evaded immediate prosecution, leaving the case in a state of unresolved limbo. This judicial inertia, however, did not equate to exoneration, as authorities maintained the investigation's open status, a tacit acknowledgement of lingering questions surrounding the tragedy. And in a move that would be unthinkable today, Jimmy Snuka's wrestling career continued virtually uninterrupted. If anything, his popularity seemed to increase in the wake of the incident. The WWF, under McMahon's leadership, was entering a period of unprecedented growth, and Snuka was positioned as one of its biggest stars. Which brings us back to that historic night in Madison Square Garden. WrestleMania 1 was more than just a wrestling show. It was a declaration of intent. McMahon was taking his company national, and he needed his biggest stars to deliver. Jimmy Snuka, despite the cloud hanging over him, was still very much one of those stars. For those watching at home on closed-circuit television, it was their first glimpse of the WWF's brave new world. And Jimmy Snuka was right at the center of it all. But WrestleMania 1 would prove to be something of a last hurrah for Jimmy in the Federation. As the company continued to expand, a new generation of superstars began to emerge. Snuka's in-ring performances, while still capable of igniting a crowd, began to decline. The toll of his high-flying style, combined with his ongoing substance abuse issues, was becoming increasingly apparent. In late 1985, just months after his WrestleMania appearance, Snuka left the company. He would spend the next several years bouncing between smaller promotions before eventually making his way back in 1989. Snuka's eventual re-emergence epitomized the complex dynamics of professional wrestling's evolving landscape. His return at WrestleMania 5 marked not only a resurgence of his iconic persona, but also the commencement of a nuanced role within the industry. Snuka's veteran status was strategically leveraged to elevate emerging talents, a common practice that underscores the collaborative nature of wrestling's narrative construction. Notably, Snuka's encounters with rising stars like Mr. Perfect demonstrated the intricate balance between maintaining established legacies and fostering new icons. This delicate equilibrium was perhaps most profoundly illustrated in his WrestleMania 7 match against The Undertaker, inadvertently catalyzing The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak. His brief 1993 return further exemplified the cyclical nature of wrestling fame, punctuating a career marked by both spectacular highs and controversial lows. But despite the cloud hanging over his past, Jimmy Snuka was inducted into the WWF Hall of Fame. In 1996, his contributions to the business were undeniable. His influence on a generation of wrestlers profound. But for many, the unanswered questions about Nancy Argentino's death continued to tarnish Snuka's legacy. In 2013, 30 years after Nancy Argentino's death, the case was reopened. Lehigh County District Attorney Jim Martin cited a number of factors for the decision, including a 1983 autopsy report that labeled the case a homicide, as well as Snuka's own contradictory statements over the years. On September 1, 2015, Snuka was arrested and charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. At 72 years old, the once mighty Superfly appeared frail and confused as he was led into court. Snuka's defense team argued that he was not mentally competent to stand trial, citing years of head trauma from his wrestling career. In January 2017, the judge in the case dismissed the charges, ruling that Snuka was not mentally fit to stand trial. Just 12 days after the charges were dismissed, on January 15, 2017, Jimmy Superfly Snuka passed away at the age of 73. He died while in hospice care in Florida, surrounded by his family. Jimmy Snuka's legacy is a complex one. To wrestling fans, he remains one of the most innovative and influential performers of his era. His high-flying style paved the way for future superstars like Rey Mysterio, Jeff Hardy, and countless others. His charisma and connection with the audience set a new standard for what a wrestling superstar could be. But Snuka's in-ring achievements will forever be clouded by the events of May 10, 1983. The death of Nancy Argentino and the subsequent decades-long quest for justice serve as a stark reminder of the dark underbelly of professional wrestling, where real-life tragedies can be swept under the rug in service of the show. For Nancy's family, the dismissal of charges against Snuka in 2017 was a bitter pill to swallow. They had waited over 3 decades for their day in court, only to see it slip away due to Snuka's declining health. As we look back on the life and career of Jimmy Superfly Snuka, we're left with a legacy as complicated as the man himself. A trailblazer in the ring, a troubled soul outside of it, a man who soared to the heights of superstardom only to crash back to earth under the weight of his own demons. In his later years, Snuka's health declined rapidly. The man who once seemed to defy gravity struggled to walk, his speech slurred by years of impacts both in and out of the ring. It was a stark reminder of the price paid for a life in professional wrestling. In the end, perhaps the truest testament to Snuka's impact is that we're still talking about him, still wrestling with his legacy, long after his final match has ended. The date is November 9th, 1997. The Molson Centre in Montreal, Quebec fills with over 20,000 fans and soon becomes heavy with anticipation. Nobody in the packed arena, not even the performers themselves, could have predicted that they were about to witness one of the most controversial moments in professional wrestling history. An incident that would blur the lines between script and reality, forever changing the landscape of the World Wrestling Federation. In the aftermath of what would become known as the Montreal Screwjob, an enraged Bret the Hitman Hart storms through the backstage area, his face contorted with genuine fury. Minutes earlier, he had been competing in what was supposed to be his final WWF match, a championship defense against his longtime rival Shawn Michaels. But something went terribly wrong. The match ended abruptly, unexpectedly, with referee Earl Hebner calling for the bell while Hart was trapped in his own signature move, the sharpshooter. He hadn't tapped out, he hadn't surrendered, yet somehow he'd lost his title. In the chaos that followed, Hart spat directly in the face of WWF owner Vince McMahon, destroyed television monitors, and carved the letters WCW in the air, a gesture that spoke volumes about the real-world tension bubbling beneath the surface of this scripted sport. This wasn't just another wrestling angle, this was the real deal. But to understand how we got here, how one of wrestling's most respected veterans ended up in this position, we need to go back and examine the perfect storm of circumstances that led to this infamous night in Montreal. The story truly begins in the Hart family's legendary dungeon, the basement of the Hart family home in Calgary, Alberta, where Bret Hart learned his craft under the strict tutelage of his father, Stu Hart. This wrestling heritage shaped Hart's entire approach to the business, one built on respect, tradition, and technical excellence. It's what made him the excellence of execution, a wrestler's wrestler who took pride in never having seriously injured an opponent in his career. By contrast, Shawn Michaels emerged from the Texas wrestling scene, transforming himself from one half of the Rockers tag team into the flamboyant Heartbreak Kid. While both men were incredible performers, their styles, both in and out of the ring, couldn't have been more different. Hart was the stoic traditionalist, and Michaels was the outspoken rebel. This fundamental contrast would prove crucial to the events that would unfold. The year is 1996, and the professional wrestling landscape is dramatically shifting. The Monday Night Wars between WWF and WCW are in full swing, with Ted Turner's WCW often getting the better of McMahon's WWF in the ratings. WCW's innovative NWO storyline has captured audiences' imagination, and their deep pockets have already lured away several WWF stars, including Scott Hall aka Razor Ramon and Kevin Nash aka Diesel, both close friends of Shawn Michaels. Bret Hart, a 12-year veteran of the Federation, stands at a crossroads. WCW has offered him a lucrative contract worth a reported $3 million per year, significantly more than what he's making in the WWF. Despite this, Hart's loyalty to the WWF runs deep. He's been with the company since 1984, rising from a tag team specialist to become one of its biggest stars. In response to WCW's offer, McMahon presents Hart with a 20-year contract, making him one of the highest-paid wrestlers in WWF history. The contract itself was unprecedented. It would have kept Hart with the WWF well past his in-ring career, transitioning him into a backstage role. For Hart, who had repeatedly turned down WCW's advances out of loyalty to McMahon, it seemed like validation of his dedication to the company. However, by 1997, the WWF's financial situation had deteriorated. The company is losing the ratings war with WCW, and several pay-per-view events have underperformed. The massive guaranteed contracts given to top stars like Hart are becoming increasingly burdensome. McMahon approaches Hart, explaining that the company can no longer afford his contract. He encourages Hart to negotiate with WCW, promising to allow him to leave with dignity. Hart begins talks with WCW, eventually securing a 3-year deal worth $3 million annually. But there's a complication. Hart is the WWF champion, and his departure date is rapidly approaching. The traditional protocol would be for Hart to lose the title before leaving, but several factors make this seemingly simple solution complex. First, Hart's contract gives him reasonable creative control over his final 30 days with the company. This unusual clause was McMahon's way of ensuring Hart wouldn't be humiliated on his way out, a common practice in wrestling at the time. Second, his scheduled final match is in Montreal, his home country, against Shawn Michaels, a man with whom he has genuine personal animosity. The bad blood between Hart and Michaels had been brewing for years. What started as professional rivalry had evolved into personal disdain. Michaels had made derogatory comments about Hart's family on television, including implications about Hart's relationship with fellow wrestler Sonny. Hart, in turn, had gotten into a real-life backstage fight with Michaels, pulling out a clump of his hair in the process. The tension was so thick that many wondered if they could work together professionally at all. Hart refuses to lose the title to Michaels in Canada, feeling it would be disrespectful to his Canadian fans. The nationalist angle had become a key part of Hart's character, with his pro-Canada stance making him a hero in his home country, but a villain in the United States. Losing the title to an American like Michaels, especially in Montreal, felt wrong to him on both a personal and professional level. He proposes alternative solutions, including losing the title to another wrestler, forfeiting it the next night on Raw, or even losing it to Michaels at a later date in the United States. McMahon initially agrees to these suggestions, even discussing specific scenarios for how the title change could occur. But beneath the surface, McMahon harbors a fear. He remembers how in 1995, Medusa appeared on Nitro and dropped the WWF Women's Championship into a garbage can on live television. The possibility, however remote, of Hart appearing on WCW television with the WWF Championship is a risk McMahon isn't willing to take. The WWF was already struggling in its war with WCW, and such an incident could prove catastrophic. The day of the Survivor Series arrives. The match is scheduled to end in a disqualification, with Hart retaining the title. Multiple wrestlers and officials, including Hart's brother Owen, Jim Neidhart, and Davey Boy Smith, are aware of this planned finish. But McMahon has other plans. In a secret meeting before the event, McMahon meets with Michaels, referee Earl Hebner, and a small group of confidants. They devise what will become known as the Screwjob. When Michaels applies Hart's own sharpshooter submission hold, Hebner will call for the bell as if Hart has submitted, regardless of whether he actually does. The choice of Hebner as referee adds another layer of betrayal to the story. Hebner had been Hart's friend for years, and this personal betrayal would haunt Hebner for years to come. The match begins normally, with both men delivering their signature moves and telling the story they'd planned. But when Michaels locks in the sharpshooter, everything changes. Hebner calls for the bell. Michaels is awarded the championship. The crowd is confused. Hart is furious. What follows is chaos. Hart spits in McMahon's face at ringside, destroys equipment, and makes the WCW gesture to the crowd. Backstage, he confronts McMahon in his office and punches him, giving him a black eye and mild concussion. The incident becomes known as the Montreal Screwjob, and its impact on professional wrestling cannot be overstated. The fallout is immediate and far-reaching. The next night on Raw, McMahon gives his infamous interview where he declares, "Bret screwed Bret," leading to the birth of the Mr. McMahon character, the evil boss persona that would help drive the WWF's comeback in the Monday Night Wars. This interview, delivered with McMahon sporting a visible black eye, would become one of the most memorable promos in wrestling history. The human cost extends far beyond the principal players. Hart's brother Owen remains with the Federation, but dies tragically in an accident less than 2 years later. The British Bulldog and Jim Neidhart, both Hart family allies, eventually leave the company. Earl Hebner, the referee, carries the burden of his role in the Screwjob for years, with many fans never forgiving him for his part in the deception. Hart's WCW run never reaches the heights of his WWF career. The company doesn't quite know how to utilize his talents, and he often finds himself lost in the shuffle of a bloated roster. A severe concussion delivered by Goldberg in late 1999 effectively ends his in-ring career, and he retires in 2000. The bitter feelings between Hart and the WWF persist for over a decade. However, some wrestling historians and fans have proposed an alternative theory, that the Montreal Screwjob was itself a work, an elaborate staged event designed to create controversy and drive storylines. They point to several curious details: the presence of cameras in positions perfect for capturing key moments, including Hart's backstage fury and the spitting incident, the fact that Hart's documentary crew was allowed to film everything that transpired, the convenient timing of the incident, which helped create the Mr. McMahon character that would prove crucial to the WWF's success during the Attitude Era. Yet most evidence suggests the incident was legitimate. Multiple participants, including referee Earl Hebner, have expressed remorse for their roles. The long-lasting personal animosity between the parties involved seems too genuine to be fabricated, and perhaps most convincingly, the damage to relationships and careers appears too severe for a planned angle. It would take 12 years for Hart and McMahon to reconcile publicly. In 2010, Hart returns to WWE programming, burying the hatchet with Michaels and McMahon on camera. He's inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and the story seemingly comes full circle. This reconciliation provides a fitting epilogue to one of wrestling's most controversial chapters. The Montreal Screwjob remains a watershed moment in professional wrestling history. It marked the end of wrestling's kayfabe era, where the line between reality and fiction was carefully protected. After Montreal, the curtain was pulled back. Wrestling would never be the same. In many ways, the incident encapsulates everything fascinating about professional wrestling: the egos and politics behind the scenes, the business decisions that affect personal relationships, and the profound impact these elements can have on the lives of those involved. As we look back at that night in Montreal, we're left with a complex legacy. Was McMahon justified in protecting his business interests? Did Hart's pride contribute to his downfall? Could the situation have been handled differently? These questions continue to spark debate among wrestling fans and industry insiders alike. Perhaps the most poetic aspect of the Montreal Screwjob is how it transformed from a moment of betrayal into a cornerstone of wrestling lore. What started as a business decision made in desperation became the catalyst for the WWF's most successful period. The Mr. McMahon character, born from the real-life aftermath of Montreal, would go on to create legendary feuds with Stone Cold Steve Austin and others, helping the WWF ultimately win the Monday Night Wars. In the end, the Montreal Screwjob transcends professional wrestling. It's a story about trust, betrayal, pride, and redemption. It's a reminder that sometimes the most memorable moments in entertainment are the ones that cut closest to reality. The date is May 5, 2002. As a chartered Boeing 757 lifts off from London's Heathrow Airport, none of the World Wrestling Federation personnel aboard could predict that the next 7 hours would become one of professional wrestling's most notorious scandals. A perfect storm of unchecked behavior, substance abuse, and reckless decision-making that would forever be known as the plane ride from hell. But to truly understand the powder keg that was about to ignite at 30,000 feet, we must first step back to examine the complex web of circumstances and personalities that set the stage for disaster. The year 2002 marked a crucial transition period for the World Wrestling Federation. Having vanquished its longtime rival WCW just a year earlier, the company was struggling to manage an unprecedented roster of talent. The purchase of WCW had brought an influx of new performers, creating a volatile mix of established veterans desperately clinging to their positions and hungry newcomers eager to claim their spot at the top. The Insurrection pay-per-view event that preceded the flight was emblematic of this transitional period. Held in London's historic Wembley Arena, the show featured a brutal main event pitting The Undertaker against Triple H, with Triple H emerging victorious after a physically demanding match. Earlier in the night, Stone Cold Steve Austin had successfully defeated The Big Show in a match that highlighted the company's old guard maintaining their grip on power. The Intercontinental Championship match saw Rob Van Dam defeat Eddie Guerrero, representing the new generation's ascent. Perhaps most significantly, X-Pac and Bradshaw engaged in a particularly stiff encounter that left Bradshaw with a nasty forehead wound, a detail that would prove crucial in the chaos to come. The UK tour itself had been a grueling affair, typical of the WWF's international excursions. Over 10 days, the roster had crisscrossed Britain, performing in cities from Glasgow to Manchester, Cardiff to Birmingham. The physical toll of nightly matches, combined with the mental strain of constant travel, had left many performers exhausted and on edge. The tour's schedule was particularly demanding. Performers would often arrive at an arena by mid-afternoon, perform for several hours, then immediately board a bus for an overnight journey to the next city. This punishing schedule was compounded by the WWF's ongoing identity crisis. As a newly public company, it was attempting to shed its reputation for excess while still maintaining the edgy entertainment that had made it successful. This contradiction was evident in the decision to provide an open bar on the chartered flight home, a choice that reflected the old-school wrestling mentality still prevalent within the corporate structure. The flight's problems began with Curt Hennig, known professionally as Mr. Perfect. Hennig had recently returned to the Federation after a successful Royal Rumble appearance in January 2002. A second-generation wrestler renowned for his technical prowess and quick wit, Hennig had built a reputation as one of wrestling's greatest in-ring performers during the late 1980s and early 1990s. His return was seen as a chance to help develop younger talent, though tensions simmered regarding his reduced status in the company. Alongside Hennig was Scott Hall, the former Razor Ramon, whose battles with alcoholism were well documented within the industry. Though not booked for the pay-per-view, Hall had performed at several tour stops, his presence a testament to the WWF's tendency to keep veteran performers on the road even when not actively featured. Both men began the flight by spraying sleeping wrestlers with shaving cream, a seemingly innocent prank that would set the tone for increasingly dangerous behavior. The situation escalated dramatically when Hennig's attention turned to Brock Lesnar, a rookie phenomenon who represented everything Hennig once was. Like Hennig, Lesnar hailed from Minnesota and boasted an impressive amateur wrestling background. The 24-year-old former NCAA Division I heavyweight champion was receiving an unprecedented push from management, already being groomed for main event status despite his inexperience. This dynamic, the fading veteran facing his own mortality in the form of a younger, stronger version of himself, created a powerful undercurrent of tension. What began as playful trash talk about their respective amateur credentials quickly evolved into a physical confrontation that would have career-ending consequences. In the confined space of the aircraft cabin, Lesnar and Hennig began to grapple. Their competitive nature, fueled by alcohol and pride, led to an increasingly dangerous situation as they crashed into walls and seats. The situation reached its terrifying apex when the two men tumbled dangerously close to the emergency exit door, creating a moment of genuine panic among the other passengers. It took the intervention of three influential figures to separate them. Triple H, whose political acumen usually made him a controversial figure, but in this instance proved valuable. Fit Finlay, a respected veteran and producer known for his no-nonsense approach, and Paul Heyman, Lesnar's advocate, both on-screen and off. The fact that it required all three men to end the confrontation spoke to its intensity. Meanwhile, the flight attendants, Taralyn Capilano and Heidi Doyle, found themselves subjected to a pattern of harassment that would later form the basis of serious legal action. Multiple wrestlers were implicated, but none more prominently than Ric Flair. The Nature Boy, a 16-time world champion and already a living legend, allegedly exposed himself while wearing his signature robe, a behavior that some defended as a long-running gag, but which took on a more sinister aspect in the confined space of an airplane. The accusations against Flair were particularly detailed and disturbing. According to later legal documents, he allegedly forced both attendants to touch him inappropriately, using his physical presence to prevent them from leaving. Flair has consistently denied these allegations, though the company's later out-of-court settlement raised questions about what really transpired. The chaos continued when Dustin Rhodes, performing as Goldust, gained control of the plane's public address system. Rhodes, whose personal life was complicated by the presence of his ex-wife Terry Runnels on the flight, began an impromptu performance that served only to heighten the uncomfortable atmosphere. His behavior was particularly troubling given his recent claims of sobriety and spiritual awakening. Jim Ross, the voice of WWF and a key backstage figure, had to personally intervene to end Rhodes's display. Then there was the situation with Michael Hayes, which epitomized the evening's descent into madness. Hayes, a founding member of the Fabulous Freebirds, and by 2002 an influential producer, became so intoxicated that he allegedly attempted to urinate on Linda McMahon, wife of WWF owner Vince McMahon. Having lost all sense of his surroundings, his night would get worse when he made the fatal error of punching Bradshaw in his already injured forehead, reopening the wound from his earlier match against X-Pac. The retaliation was swift and severe. Bradshaw, himself known for being a tough customer and occasional bully, knocked Hayes unconscious. But the humiliation wasn't complete until X-Pac, representing the sentiment of many wrestlers who resented Hayes' authority, cut off his signature mullet while he lay unconscious. Hayes wouldn't discover this final indignity until going through customs, providing a moment of dark comedy in what was otherwise a troubling series of events. The immediate aftermath saw WWF attempt damage control through their website, posting a statement promising such incidents would never recur. The company's response varied significantly depending on the performer's status. Curt Hennig, despite his legendary prestige, was terminated for instigating the dangerous situation with Lesnar. Scott Hall, though apparently unconscious for most of the flight, was also released, with his ongoing substance abuse issues cited as the primary reason. The 2004 lawsuit, filed by Capilano and Doyle, forced WWE to confront its corporate responsibilities more directly. The legal action, which included graphic allegations about multiple performers' behavior, resulted in an out-of-court settlement. This resolution, while avoiding public testimony, raised questions about what the company might have been trying to keep private. The incident prompted significant changes in WWE's travel policies. The era of open bars on chartered flights ended abruptly. The company implemented stricter behavioral guidelines for talent, particularly during international tours. The plane ride from hell became a cautionary tale in the corporate orientation for new talent, though the specific details were often glossed over. When Vice's Dark Side of the Ring series covered the incident in their 2021 episode, it forced the wrestling industry and fans to re-examine these events through a modern lens. The episode, featuring first-hand accounts from flight attendant Heidi Doyle, painted a particularly damning picture of the culture that enabled such behavior. The impact was immediate and significant. Ric Flair's scheduled appearance on AEW programming was cancelled, and several sponsors distanced themselves from the two-time Hall of Famer. The documentary series' treatment of the incident highlighted how wrestling's attitude towards such behavior had evolved. What was once treated as another wild road story, the stuff of wrestling legend, was now recognized as a series of serious crimes and misconduct that traumatized innocent people. The episode sparked important discussions about accountability in professional wrestling and the industry's historical treatment of women. The plane ride from hell stands as a pivotal moment in professional wrestling's evolution, from carnival attraction to corporate entertainment. It marked the end of an era where the excesses of the business went unchecked and helped usher in a period of greater professionalism and accountability. While the industry continues to grapple with many of these issues today, the incident serves as a stark reminder of the consequences when the line between entertainment and excess becomes dangerously blurred. The date is April 1st, 2023. The SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California, is electric with anticipation. Over 67,000 fans from across the globe have gathered for WrestleMania 39, the pinnacle event of World Wrestling entertainment. The air crackles with excitement as pyrotechnics explode and larger-than-life personalities clash in choreographed combat. This spectacle, a far cry from the smoke-filled bingo halls of wrestling's past, is the culmination of one man's vision. A vision that has transformed a regional wrestling promotion into a global sports entertainment juggernaut. As the final bell rings and the crowd erupts in a deafening roar, few could imagine that this moment marks the end of an era. The very next day, news breaks that shakes the foundations of the wrestling world. WWE is to be acquired by Endeavor Group in a staggering $21 billion deal. This seismic shift in the landscape of sports entertainment brings into sharp focus the legacy of the man who built this empire from the ground up, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. The name Vince McMahon has become synonymous with professional wrestling, a figurehead as iconic as the stars he helped create. But behind the bombastic on-screen persona lies a complex figure whose rise to power is as fascinating as it is controversial. From humble beginnings to the pinnacle of a multi-billion-dollar industry, McMahon's journey is a testament to ruthless ambition, unparalleled vision, and a willingness to push boundaries, both in business and in ethics. To truly understand the magnitude of McMahon's impact, we must journey back to where it all began, where a young Vince, unaware of his paternal lineage, was about to embark on a path that would change the face of sports entertainment forever. Vincent Kennedy McMahon was born on August 24, 1945, in Pinehurst, North Carolina. His early years were far from the glitz and glamour that would later define his career. Raised primarily by his mother and a series of stepfathers, young Vince had no idea that his biological father, Vincent James McMahon, was a successful wrestling promoter in the Northeast. It wasn't until the age of 12 that Vince met his father for the first time. This encounter would prove to be a pivotal moment in his life, igniting a passion for the wrestling business that would shape his future. Despite the newfound connection, Vince's relationship with his father remained distant, with the elder McMahon focusing on his wrestling promotion, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. After graduating from East Carolina University with a business degree in 1968, Vince began working for his father's company as a ring announcer and commentator. It was here that he began to learn the ins and outs of the wrestling business, observing his father's operations and formulating his own ideas about how to expand and improve the product. In 1971, Vince took on more responsibility within the company and promoted his first card. This taste of success fueled his ambition, and he quickly proved himself to be a savvy promoter with an eye for talent and spectacle. However, it wasn't until 1982 that Vince made the move that would change the course of wrestling history. The promotion had now been rebranded to the World Wrestling Federation, and with his father's health declining, Vince and his wife Linda purchased the company from his father and the other shareholders. The price tag was a hefty $1 million, a significant sum at the time, especially considering the regional nature of the business. But Vince had a vision that extended far beyond the Northeast territory his father had controlled. From the moment he assumed command, McMahon set about transforming the WWF from a regional promotion into a national powerhouse. This expansion wasn't just a business strategy, it was a direct challenge to the established order of professional wrestling. For decades, wrestling had operated under a gentleman's agreement, with various promoters controlling specific territories and rarely encroaching on each other's turf. McMahon saw this system as antiquated and limiting. His strategy for national expansion was multifaceted. He began by raiding talent from other territories, offering wrestlers bigger paydays and the promise of national exposure. Stars like Hulk Hogan, Rowdy Roddy Piper, and Andre the Giant became the cornerstones of McMahon's new vision for wrestling. one that emphasized larger-than-life characters and storytelling over pure athletic competition. But perhaps McMahon's most revolutionary move was his embrace of cable television and pay-per-view technology. In 1985, he took a massive gamble by producing and promoting the first WrestleMania event. This star-studded spectacle, featuring celebrities like Mr. T and Cyndi Lauper alongside wrestling stars, was a watershed moment for the industry. Its success proved that wrestling could draw mainstream attention and paved the way for the WWF's rapid expansion. As the federation grew, so did McMahon's on-screen presence. Initially serving as a play-by-play announcer, he gradually developed a more prominent role. His commentary style, characterized by enthusiastic hyperbole and memorable catchphrases, became an integral part of the WWF's presentation. Little did fans know that the excited voice describing the action was also the mastermind behind the entire operation. The late 1980s and early 1990s saw the WWF reach new heights of popularity. The rock and wrestling era, spearheaded by Hulk Hogan and other colorful characters, captured the imagination of a new generation of fans. Wrestling was no longer seen as a niche interest. It had become a pop culture phenomenon. Yet with great success came great scrutiny. In 1994, McMahon found himself at the center of a federal trial, accused of distributing steroids to his wrestlers. This wasn't just a minor allegation, it threatened the very foundation of McMahon's empire and the integrity of professional wrestling as a whole. The federal government alleged that McMahon had not only been aware of steroid use among his wrestlers, but had actively encouraged and facilitated it. The indictment claimed that McMahon had personally distributed steroids to wrestlers and had pressured them to use the drugs to maintain the muscular physiques that had become synonymous with WWF superstars. The trial, which began in July 1994, was a media sensation. McMahon, ever the showman, took to the stand in his own defense. His testimony was a high-stakes performance, with McMahon vehemently denying any wrongdoing and portraying himself as a victim of overzealous prosecution. In a dramatic turn of events, McMahon was acquitted of all charges. The jury found that while steroid use was undoubtedly prevalent in professional wrestling, there wasn't sufficient evidence to prove that McMahon had personally distributed the drugs or coerced wrestlers into using them. While the trial was a personal victory for McMahon, it cast a long shadow over the industry and forced him to re-evaluate certain aspects of his business. The steroid trial was not the only controversy to rock McMahon's empire. On May 23, 1999, during the Over the Edge pay-per-view event, tragedy struck when wrestler Owen Hart fell to his death while attempting an aerial entrance. The decision to continue the show after Hart's fatal accident was met with widespread criticism and raised serious questions about McMahon's priorities and the overall safety standards in professional wrestling. Hart, performing under his blue blazer gimmick, was set to make a dramatic entrance from the rafters of the Kemper Arena in Kansas City. However, something went terribly wrong, and Hart fell 78 feet, landing chest first on the top rope. He was pronounced dead shortly after being rushed to the hospital. The controversy surrounding this tragedy was twofold. Why was a wrestler being asked to perform such a dangerous entrance? And were proper safety precautions taken? These questions led to a wrongful death lawsuit filed by Hart's widow, Martha, which was eventually settled out of court for $18 million. But perhaps even more controversial was McMahon's decision to continue the pay-per-view event after Hart's fall. While the television audience was not shown the accident, those in attendance were left in shock and confusion. The decision to carry on with the show was seen by many as callous and disrespectful to Hart's memory. McMahon defended his decision, arguing that the show must go on, and that it was what Owen would have wanted. This explanation did little to quell the outrage, and the incident remains a black mark on McMahon's legacy. It reinforced the perception of McMahon as a ruthless businessman who prioritized the show over the well-being of his performers. Despite these setbacks, McMahon proved to be a master of reinvention. The late 1990s saw the WWF embroiled in a ratings war with rival promotion World Championship Wrestling. This period, known as the Monday Night Wars, pushed McMahon to innovate once again. The result was the Attitude Era, a grittier, more adult-oriented product that pushed the boundaries of taste and censorship. It was during this time that McMahon fully embraced his on-screen persona as the villainous Mr. McMahon. This character, a power-hungry megalomaniacal boss, was in many ways an exaggeration of how McMahon was perceived behind the scenes. The Mr. McMahon character became one of the most hated villains in wrestling history, engaging in feuds with popular stars like Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock. McMahon's willingness to put himself in the spotlight, often in physically demanding and humiliating situations, earned him a begrudging respect from fans and wrestlers alike. Here was the boss, a man in his 50s, taking real bumps and putting his body on the line for the entertainment of the audience. This hands-on approach set McMahon apart from other sports executives and further cemented his acclaimed status within the industry. As the new millennium dawned, McMahon's WWF stood alone atop the wrestling world. The purchase of WCW in 2001 marked the end of the Monday Night Wars and the beginning of WWF's monopoly on mainstream professional wrestling in North America. However, success and controversy continued to go hand in hand for McMahon. In 2007, following Chris Benoit's double murder-suicide, McMahon's name had surfaced in a federal investigation of a steroid ring. While no charges were filed, the incident reignited discussions about the use of performance-enhancing drugs in professional wrestling. While McMahon himself was not directly accused of wrongdoing, the incident raised questions about the effectiveness of WWE's wellness policy, which had been implemented in the wake of the 1994 steroid trial. In response to the controversy, WWE suspended several wrestlers and made further modifications to its wellness policy. Yet critics argued that these measures were insufficient and that a culture of steroid use persisted within the company. More damaging were the allegations of sexual misconduct. In 2022, the Wall Street Journal reported that McMahon had paid millions of dollars in hush money to former female employees who alleged sexual misconduct. These revelations led to McMahon temporarily stepping down as CEO and chairman of WWE while an internal investigation was conducted. The sexual misconduct allegations were particularly damaging to McMahon's reputation and legacy. According to reports, McMahon had paid at least $12 million in hush money over the past 16 years to suppress allegations of sexual misconduct and infidelity. The payments were made to 4 women, all of whom had been associated with WWE in some capacity. One of the most significant payments was reportedly $7.5 million to a former wrestler who alleged that McMahon coerced her into performing oral sex, demoted her, and then declined to renew her contract when she refused further sexual encounters. Another payment of $1 million was made to a WWE contractor who had received unsolicited nude photos from McMahon. These allegations painted a picture of a powerful executive abusing his position and engaging in predatory behavior. They also raised questions about the corporate culture at WWE and whether the company's board of directors had been aware of McMahon's behavior. In response to the allegations, the board launched an internal investigation. McMahon initially stepped back from his roles as CEO and chairman, but remained involved in the company's creative content. But as the investigation progressed and more details emerged, pressure mounted for McMahon to completely step away from the company. The sexual misconduct allegations and subsequent investigation marked a significant turning point in McMahon's career. They forced a reckoning not just within WWE, but in the broader wrestling industry about power dynamics, workplace conduct, and the treatment of women in a male-dominated field. McMahon's legacy is complex and often contradictory. He's been hailed as a visionary who revolutionized an industry and criticized as a ruthless businessman who prioritized profits over the well-being of his performers. He's been both a hero and a villain, both on-screen and off. The sale of WWE to Endeavor marks the end of an era, but Vince McMahon's impact on the industry he helped shape will be felt for generations to come. Love him or hate him, there's no denying that Vincent Kennedy McMahon is one of the most significant figures in the history of American entertainment. As the dust settles on this new chapter in WWE's history, one thing remains certain: the world of professional wrestling will never be the same. And for better or worse, we have Vince McMahon to thank for that. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power and the importance of accountability, even as it celebrates the transformative potential of vision and determination. As WWE moves forward under new ownership, the wrestling world watches with bated breath, wondering what the next chapter will bring and how the shadow of Vince McMahon will continue to loom over the industry he so fundamentally shaped. The date is April 7th, 1986. The eyes of the wrestling world are fixed on the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena, where an imposing figure stands in the ring. his massive 458-pound frame casting an ominous shadow across the canvas. King Kong Bundy, the walking condominium, awaits his destiny in the steel cage main event of WrestleMania 2 against Hulk Hogan. The anticipation is palpable as two titans of professional wrestling prepare to wage war in what would become one of the most memorable matches of the 1980s. Bundy, with his shaved head and black singlet, epitomized the monster heel of the era, a seemingly unstoppable force that pushed even the mighty Hulk Hogan to his absolute limits. Yet today, despite his undeniable impact on professional wrestling and his role in helping establish WrestleMania as sports entertainment's premier event, King Kong Bundy's name remains conspicuously absent from the WWE Hall of Fame. In 2016, Bundy joined a class-action lawsuit against the company regarding brain damage, becoming one of over 50 former performers to challenge the company's handling of head injuries. This legal action, while highlighting crucial concerns about wrestler safety, effectively severed his relationship with World Wrestling Entertainment. Even after his passing in 2019, the company's apparent grudge has persisted, leaving one of wrestling's most memorable big men shafted from his due prestige. Number 2, the exclusion of Owen Hart from the Hall of Fame represents perhaps the most poignant and complex case of all. The youngest member of the legendary Hart wrestling family, Owen's technical brilliance and charismatic personality made him one of the most beloved performers of the 1990s. His tragic death at the Over the Edge pay-per-view in 1999 sent shockwaves through the industry that reverberate to this day. However, Owen's absence from the Hall of Fame stems not from any personal transgression, but from the steadfast position of his widow, Martha Hart. Following Owen's death, Martha's relationship with WWE became irreparably fractured through years of contentious litigation. She has consistently maintained that the company's negligence contributed to Owen's death and has refused to allow his legacy to be formally recognized with a Hall of Fame induction. Number 3, the tag team known as Demolition, Axe, Smash, and later Crush, dominated the Federation's tag team division during the late 1980s, setting a record for the longest tag team championship reign that stood for decades. Their imposing presence and unique face-painted aesthetic made them one of the most memorable teams in wrestling history. However, like King Kong Bundy, their path to the Hall of Fame was derailed by legal action against the company. Both Axe and Smash joined the aforementioned traumatic brain injury lawsuit, effectively ending any chance of their induction. Their exclusion highlights a pattern within WWE of institutional memory being selectively edited based on current corporate relationships rather than historical impact. Number 4, the Dynamite Kid's absence from the Hall of Fame represents one of wrestling's most tragic cautionary tales. Tom Billington revolutionized professional wrestling with his innovative high-flying style and intense matches, particularly in Japan and as part of the British Bulldogs. His influence can be seen in countless modern performers. However, his career and life were marred by extensive steroid use, painkiller addiction, and a reputation for being difficult and sometimes cruel behind the scenes. His relationship with WWE soured long before his death in 2018, and his physical deterioration in his later years served as a stark reminder of wrestling's darker side. While his in-ring contributions were undeniable, the company has chosen to distance itself from his legacy, perhaps due to concerns about celebrating a figure whose personal struggles so starkly illustrated the industry's historical demons. Number 5, Chris Benoit's exclusion from the Hall of Fame requires little explanation, but demands careful examination. Prior to the horrific murder-suicide that claimed the lives of his wife Nancy and son Daniel in 2007, Benoit was considered one of the greatest technical wrestlers in history. His matches with Kurt Angle, Eddie Guerrero, and others set new standards for in-ring excellence. However, the tragedy that ended his life has rightfully overshadowed his professional achievements. WWE's decision to essentially erase Benoit from their history reflects both a moral stance and a practical business decision. While some argue for separating the artist from the art, the magnitude of Benoit's actions makes such compartmentalization impossible. His case represents the most extreme example of how personal actions can negate professional achievements. Number 6, Psycho Sid's absence from the Hall of Fame reflects a different kind of corporate politics. Sid Justice, as he was also known, main evented multiple WrestleManias and held the Federation Championship belt twice. His imposing presence and memorable catchphrases made him a significant figure during the mid-1990s. Yet his spats with Vince McMahon, alongside his reputation for being unreliable and his habit of leaving the company at inopportune moments, appear to have left a lasting negative impression on company management. Sid also viciously assaulted Arn Anderson with scissors during a hotel altercation in 1993, inflicting 20 stab wounds that nearly claimed Anderson's life, an incident that almost certainly factors into the company's reluctance to enshrine him in their Hall of Fame. The brutality of this real-life attack perhaps serves as an unspoken barrier to his receiving wrestling's highest honor. Number 7. Brian Pillman's omission from the Hall of Fame represents a curious case of historical amnesia. The loose cannon was revolutionary in how he blurred the lines between reality and fiction, creating a character so convincing that even his fellow wrestlers were often unsure what was real and what was performance. His tragic death in 1997 at age 35 cut short a career that was innovating the business in unprecedented ways. But the WWE's reluctance to fully embrace Pillman's legacy might stem from the darker aspects of his story, his battles with substance abuse, the controversial angles he participated in, and perhaps most significantly, the company's uncomfortable role in his final days, including a notorious interview with his widow less than 24 hours after his death. Despite his influence on modern character work, Pillman remains outside the Hall of Fame's walls. Number 8. Bam Bam Bigelow, the Beast from the East, represents one of the most puzzling Hall of Fame exclusions. A 400-pound athlete who could move like a man half his size, Bigelow main-evented WrestleMania 11 against NFL star Lawrence Taylor and consistently delivered remarkable performances throughout his career. His omission seems to stem not from any major controversy, but from WWE's sometimes arbitrary standards for inclusion. Despite his popularity, innovative style, and significant contributions to the business, Bigelow's career peaked at a time when the company was struggling commercially, perhaps diminishing his perceived historical importance. Bigelow's 2007 death, stemming from an acute toxicity of cocaine and benzodiazepines, also likely factors into the institutional reluctance to posthumously honor him, as the company continues its decades-long effort to distance itself from the industry's more troubling aspects regarding performer mortality and drug use. Number 9. The conspicuous absence of Miss Elizabeth from the Hall of Fame stands as one of professional wrestling's most profound omissions, given her revolutionary impact on the role of female personalities in the industry during the 1980s and early 1990s. Her tragic death in 2003 from a toxic combination of prescription medications and alcohol cast a dark shadow over her legacy, occurring during an era when wrestling-related deaths were drawing intense media scrutiny and public criticism. Despite her groundbreaking work as the sophisticated antithesis to wrestling's traditionally brash female characters, and her pivotal role in storylines like the Mega Powers explosion between Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, WWE appears hesitant to celebrate a figure whose personal struggles and devastating end mirror some of the industry's darkest chapters. The circumstances of her passing seemingly present complex narratives that the company would rather avoid in maintaining their current corporate image, though her contributions to wrestling's golden age remain undeniable and worthy of recognition. Number 10. Lex Luger's absence from the Hall of Fame encapsulates many of the complex factors that can keep a performer from receiving this honor. The total package was one of the most heavily pushed stars of the early 1990s, famously body-slamming Yokozuna on the USS Intrepid and co-winning the 1994 Royal Rumble. However, his abrupt jump to WCW in 1995, his association with the death of Elizabeth Hewlett, and his own substance abuse issues have created a complicated legacy. Despite his recent reconciliation with the company, including appearances on WWE programming, the company has yet to formally recognize his contributions with a Hall of Fame induction, suggesting that some bridges, once burned, remain difficult to fully rebuild. The date is April 2nd, 1989. Trump Plaza in Atlantic City buzzes with anticipation as Dino Bravo makes his way to the ring at WrestleMania 5 to face rugged Ronnie Garvin. His muscular frame and cocky demeanor command attention as he is the self-proclaimed world's strongest man. a solid mid-card talent who consistently delivers engaging matches. The capacity crowd of close to 19,000 raucous fans shower him with boos as he flexes and preens, playing the perfect heel. Not a single person in attendance that night could have imagined that less than 4 years later, Bravo would be discovered dead in his Quebec home, his body riddled with 11 bullets, the victim of what investigators believe was a mob hit related to cigarette smuggling. His brutal murder remains unsolved to this day, and WWE has largely erased him from their historical narrative, rarely acknowledging his contributions to the company during the transformative 1980s boom period. Number 2, this selective amnesia regarding deceased performers would unfortunately become a recurring theme in the decades that followed. In 2009, the wrestling world was shaken by the death of Edward Fatu, better known as Umaga, who suffered a fatal heart attack at just 36 years old. Here was a man who had revolutionized what a super heavyweight could do in the ring, combining devastating power moves with surprising agility that defied his 350-pound frame. His feuds with John Cena and Jeff Hardy produced some of the most memorable matches of the late 2000s. But beneath the face paint and success lay a troubled soul battling substance abuse issues. When WWE mandated he enter rehabilitation, Umaga refused and was subsequently released. 6 months later, he was found unresponsive in his Houston home, having suffered a heart attack brought on by acute toxicity of multiple drugs. Number 3, the tragic tale of Tony Halm, known professionally as Ludwig Borga, seemed destined for superstardom with his 1993 Federation debut. Positioned as an unstoppable foreign heel, Borga immediately made waves by ending Tatanka's 2-year undefeated streak. However, his promising run would be cut short by injury, and his post-wrestling life spiraled into a maze of controversy and mental health struggles. After failed attempts at both political office and acting in Finland, including a controversial stint in the Finnish parliament, Halm's demons finally overtook him. He died by suicide in 2010 from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. WWE remained conspicuously silent, perhaps wanting to distance themselves from his controversial political views and troubled final years. Number 4, Chris Canyon's death in 2010 forces us to confront particularly uncomfortable questions about the wrestling industry's treatment of mental health and sexual identity. A gifted technical wrestler known for his innovative offense and ability to make any opponent look good, Canyon struggled with both depression and his sexual identity throughout his career. His suicide at age 40 came after years of mental health battles and his public coming out as gay. The sudden death, accomplished through an overdose of antidepressants, raised serious questions about the psychological toll of hiding one's identity in such a hyper-masculine environment. Number 5, the 2003 death of Crash Holly struck particularly deep within the wrestling community. Michael Lockwood had created one of the most beloved characters of the Attitude Era, a scrappy underdog who claimed to be a super heavyweight, despite his modest size. His innovative 24/7 defense of the Hardcore Championship produced countless memorable moments, with Holly having to defend his title in locations ranging from airports to amusement parks. However, like many others, the transition to life after wrestling proved overwhelming. Found dead in wrestler Stevie Richards' home from an apparent suicide via prescription drug overdose, Holly's passing received minimal acknowledgement from the company he had helped entertain millions for. The man who had brought so much joy to audiences was reduced to a footnote on WWE.com. Number 6, Viscera, known variously as Mabel and King Mabel, embodied the evolution of the super heavyweight in professional wrestling. His ability to adapt and remain relevant through multiple character iterations spoke to his underappreciated versatility. When Frazier died in 2014 from a heart attack, just days after his 43rd birthday, it highlighted the health risks faced by wrestlers of his size. Despite a career spanning over a decade with the company, WWE's acknowledgement of his death was perfunctory. The broader conversation about the health challenges faced by super heavyweight wrestlers and the industry's responsibility to address them remained unspoken. Number 7, Lance Cade's death in 2010 at the heartbreakingly young age of 29 epitomizes the human cost of the wrestling business. Trained by Shawn Michaels and blessed with a combination of size, skill, and charisma, Cade showed immense promise early in his career. Many insiders pegged him as a future world champion, particularly during his successful tag team run with Trevor Murdoch. His release in 2008, following a seizure on an airplane, marked the beginning of a tragic decline. When he died from heart failure due to mixed drug intoxication 2 years later, WWE's response was minimal, despite him having performed for them just 2 years prior. Number 8. Ray Fernandez, known professionally as Hercules, represented the classical ideal of what a professional wrestler should look like during the 1980s. His phenomenal physique and intensity made him a credible opponent for anyone, including Hulk Hogan during the height of Hulkamania. His transformation from a noble warrior to a slave of Bobby the Brain Heenan, complete with chains and shackles, demonstrated his versatility as a performer. Yet when he died in 2004 from heart disease at age 47, after years of battling various health issues, WWE barely acknowledged the passing of a man who had been a cornerstone of their roster during their most profitable era. The questions about how his wrestling career and lifestyle may have contributed to his early death went unasked. Number 9. Andrew Test. Martin's story reads like a cautionary tale about the pressures of professional wrestling. Blessed with an impressive physique and natural athleticism, Test seemed destined for main event status when he debuted in 1998. His high-profile storyline engagement to Stephanie McMahon and subsequent betrayal marked him as a star on the rise. However, despite multiple pushes and repackaging attempts, Test never quite reached the heights many predicted. His 2009 death from an accidental overdose at age 33 came just days before his 34th birthday. Despite his significant role in major storylines and multiple runs with the company, WWE's acknowledgement of his death was brief. The broader questions about what led to his substance abuse issues and whether more could have been done to help him remained unaddressed. Number 10. Sean O'Haire represented wrestling's future when he debuted in the early 2000s. Athletic, charismatic, and trained in mixed martial arts before it became commonplace, his innovative offense and unique devil's advocate character showed immense promise, with many considering him a potential breakout star. His character, a smooth-talking manipulator who encouraged people to indulge their darker impulses, was years ahead of its time. However, his run never reached its potential, and after leaving wrestling, O'Haire struggled with depression and substance abuse. His death by suicide in 2014 raised uncomfortable questions about how the industry supports performers after their in-ring careers end. WWE's minimal acknowledgement of his passing seemingly ignored both his contributions to the business and the broader implications of his struggles. Number 11. Matt Bourne's portrayal of the original Doink the Clown brought a level of psychological depth rarely seen in wrestling personas. What could have been a flat, one-dimensional character, a typical circus clown, became something far more sinister under Bourne's skillful interpretation. He transformed Doink into a disturbing and complex antagonist, one who delighted in the misfortune of others and left a lasting impression on audiences. The intricacy he infused into the role set a standard that influenced countless performers who followed in his footsteps, proving that even outlandish characters could possess genuine depth and darkness. However, Bourne's personal life was marred by struggles with substance abuse, a battle that would tragically define his later years. In 2013, he passed away from an accidental overdose of morphine and hydrocodone, a tragic end to a gifted performer's life. Despite creating one of the Federation's most iconic characters, Bourne's contributions and personal struggles received only fleeting acknowledgement from the company. Though his story ended in darkness, Bourne's legacy burns bright in the memories of those who witnessed his remarkable journey. The date is May 5, 2002. A chartered flight carrying some of the most recognizable faces in professional wrestling departs from London, bound for the United States. On board is a combustible mix of personalities, icons of the squared circle, primed by an open bar and frayed nerves after a grueling European tour. What ensues is now etched into wrestling infamy as the plane ride from hell. Tensions escalate as alcohol flows freely, stripping away any semblance of professional decorum. Ric Flair, the legendary Nature Boy, parades down the aisle wearing nothing but his signature robe, allegedly exposing himself to flight attendants. Kurt Hennig, better known as Mr. Perfect, engages in a mid-flight scuffle with Brock Lesnar, a towering force of brute strength nearly causing chaos at 35,000 feet. Meanwhile, Dustin Runnels, formerly Goldust, commandeers the plane's public address system in an inebriated haze. Reports of sexual misconduct by wrestlers toward flight attendants eventually emerged, resulting in lawsuits, firings, and permanent reputational damage. The incident remains a sobering reminder of the unchecked excesses that defined an era of wrestling. Scandals have always shadowed the glitz and glamour of professional wrestling, where larger-than-life personas often hide darker truths. Next up, the number 9 scandal on our list takes us further into the tangled web of power dynamics and abuse within the industry. The year is 1986, and Rita Chatterton, the first female referee in the World Wrestling Federation, makes an explosive accusation against Vince McMahon, the organization's imperious chairman. Chatterton alleges that McMahon sexually assaulted and raped her in the back of a limousine, an accusation that McMahon vehemently denies. The wrestling industry's response to Chatterton's allegations was predictably and grotesquely protective of McMahon. She was systematically marginalized, her professional opportunities evaporated, and her credibility was relentlessly attacked. The Federation used its considerable media influence to discredit her, a tactic that would become depressingly familiar in subsequent decades of corporate misconduct revelations. Decades later, in the era of the Me Too movement, her story resurfaced, reigniting debates about the systemic silencing of victims in wrestling. While McMahon settled other allegations out of court and stepped down in 2022 amid new scandals, the shadow of Chatterton's accusations remains a haunting testament to the price of speaking out in an industry dominated by powerful men. Number 8. Pat Patterson and Terry Garvin's sexual misconduct allegations represented a seismic revelation in wrestling's shadowy ecosystem. As prominent Federation management figures in the 1980s, they weaponized institutional power to systematically exploit vulnerable performers, transforming backstage interactions into a labyrinth of coercion and manipulation. These weren't mere isolated incidents, but a calculated mechanism of control. Young wrestlers, economically precarious and professionally dependent, found themselves trapped in an unspoken transactional environment where career advancement demanded personal compromise. Patterson, an openly gay man, occupied a particularly complex position, his marginalized identity paradoxically enabling predatory behavior within wrestling's hyper-masculine culture. The industry's response was quintessentially protective. Allegations were aggressively suppressed, victims silenced, and institutional accountability meticulously avoided. Patterson and Garvin suffered minimal professional consequences, a testament to the intricate protective networks shielding powerful men. This scandal emerged as a crucible moment, forcing wrestling to confront the performative violence underlying its theatrical spectacle, a brutal exposure of power's most insidious manifestations. Number 7. The scissor fight between Sid Vicious and Arn Anderson represents one of wrestling's most legendary moments of unscripted existential volatility, a confrontation that erupted into horrific violence. During a British wrestling tour, mundane tensions transformed into a catastrophic encounter, where Anderson and Sid savagely exchanged scissor blows, resulting in a grotesque tableau, with Anderson sustaining 20 stab wounds and 1.5 pints of blood spilled across the floor. If not for two cold Scorpios' intervention, wrestling history might have descended into irredeemable tragedy. This wasn't merely a backstage brawl, but a profound sociological spectacle revealing wrestling's psychological underbelly. Two respected performers, typically masters of choreographed violence, suddenly inhabited a realm beyond scripted performance, a raw, unfiltered manifestation of masculine aggression and institutional instability. WCW management swiftly suppressed the incident, exemplifying the industry's pathological commitment to internal resolution. The wrestling world transmuted the fight into folkloric legend, a perverse testament to the bizarre, unregulated ecosystem underlying professional wrestling's theatrical facade. Number 6. In May of 1987, wrestling's intricate performative architecture catastrophically imploded when Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik were stopped by New Jersey State Police, a moment that would obliterate their meticulously constructed narrative of on-screen antagonism. Discovered in a drug-induced state, with Duggan narcotically embraced by marijuana and the Sheik saturated in cocaine's chemical poetry, their arrest became a sublime metaphysical deconstruction of wrestling's elaborate mythology. The apprehension shattered their WrestleMania 3 legacy. where before 93,000 witnesses at the Pontiac Silverdome, they had enacted a choreographed geopolitical drama. Sheik and Volkov, mid-camel clutch against the Killer Bees, represented wrestling's highest theatrical artifice. Now reduced to a roadside tragedy, the consequential mini-scandal transcended mere professional punishment. The Sheik's Federation exile and Duggan's temporary displacement represented a brutal autopsy of performance's existential fragility, where scripted heroism dissolves into raw, unmediated human vulnerability, exposing wrestling's mythological construct from its chemical reality. Number 5. The name Buck Zumhofe might ring a faint bell for wrestling historians. A minor player in the 1980s Federation scene, best remembered for being the first to be stuffed into a body bag by The Undertaker. But Zumhofe's legacy is overshadowed by crimes far more sinister. In 2014, he was convicted of sexually abusing his own daughter over a period of years, a shocking revelation that sent ripples through the wrestling community. Zumhofe's heinous actions cast a dark shadow over his wrestling career, highlighting how the industry often failed to scrutinize the personal lives of its performers. His conviction brought a tragic end to a life once intertwined with wrestling's golden era. Number 4. The murder of Bruiser Brody in 1988 remains one of the most chilling events in wrestling history. Brody, a towering figure known for his wild, brawling style, was stabbed to death in a locker room shower before a match in Puerto Rico. The alleged assailant, wrestler and booker Jose Gonzalez, claimed self-defense and was acquitted in a controversial trial that many believe was marred by witness intimidation and a biased legal system. Fellow wrestlers, including Tony Atlas, later came forward with harrowing accounts of the incident, but justice was never truly served. Brody's death exposed the dangerous underbelly of the wrestling business, where disputes could turn fatal and the lines between business and personal vendettas often blurred. Number 3. The Federation's 1993 steroid scandal represents wrestling's most profound institutional autopsy, a moment where the industry's muscular mythology was surgically dissected, revealing its anabolic underpinnings. Though McMahon's legal acquittal seemed a victory, the scandal irreversibly transformed wrestling's architectural paradigm. This was more than a legal proceeding, it was an existential reckoning. The steroid trial became a brutal metaphor, exposing the synthetic alchemy through which wrestling transmuted ordinary men into mythological figures. Number 2. Vince McMahon, wrestling's imperial architect, once served as Jimmy Snuka's enabler, suppressing early evidence of Snuka's violent tendencies towards his mistress. In 1983, following her death, Nancy Argentino's body bore the brutal cartography of repeated violence, traumatic head injuries that screamed domestic horror. Yet the wrestling industry's response was a masterclass in institutional gaslighting. Snuka's performative persona as the high-flying Superfly became a shield, obscuring a monstrous personal reality. Argentino's death was more than a crime. It was an indictment, a haunting testament to wrestling's pathological commitment to protecting its own at any moral cost. Number 1. Chris Benoit's tragedy represents wrestling's most haunting existential rupture, a catastrophic dissolution of human consciousness that transformed a celebrated performer into an agent of unfathomable familial destruction. In June 2007, Benoit obliterated his meticulously constructed persona, murdering his wife Nancy and 7-year-old son Daniel before orchestrating his own terminal conclusion. The response from WWE was calculated and absolute. Benoit was excised from institutional memory, his name a forbidden utterance. Yet the tragedy persists as a profound indictment, an unignorable testament to the human cost of an industry that sacrifices performers' neurological integrity at the altar of spectacle. If you want to uncover Benoit's cautionary dissent that deconstructs the delicate boundary between heroic performance and human catastrophe, then just click the thumbnail appearing on your screen right now and I'll meet you there momentarily. Thank you for watching.